Hi, folks. This is Professor Dr. Phil Campos coming to you from Dallas, Texas. And today I wanted to talk to you about working for the government and on a federal level, and especially specifically becoming a contract specialist or a contracting officer. And those are the people that, folks, that buy goods and services for the federal government. Now, states also have, the same type of programs, but it's a different process on the state level. So everything I'm going to talk about today, and also in my book review, relates to buying goods and services on the federal level. So why did I write this book? Well, I've been a professor at a large university since 2005. And I've always taught contract administration, contract law, business courses, marketing, etc. And in all my classes, I always had students always asking me, "Hey, professor, so how do you get in? How do you work with the government? How did you get in?" And then also when my daughter graduated from college a little while back, I talked with her about the possibility of working for the government with her degree. And one thing that you're going to find out, in trying to figure out can you work as a contract specialist is, do I need a degree when I get in? And you're going to find that the answer is no. You need 24 hours in business or related areas in business to get in, but you don't have to have a degree when you first walk in the door or apply. So because I had so many questions and I kept on repeating myself over and over again, I said, you know what? I want to put all the information that I know on working for the government and how to apply and a little bit of what I did as a contracting officer, for the numerous agencies that I worked for in a book and make it easy for you. How do you get in? What are the requirements? How much do you get paid? What do you buy? How do you administer a contract? What about the future? And the government always has all these acronyms. What do they mean? And if they change, or how do I look them up? So that's why I decided to write this book. I wanted to keep it under 100 pages, uh, so that you don't have to take forever to read it. But for less than $20, it's great. It's a great read. It's a great reference. When you read it, you can pass it on. The book right now has been available on Amazon.com for over a year. And, every month I sell some books. But I wanted to do an update on the video and then talk about the book again. And again, the book the title is Buying Goods and Services for the U.S. government, a good career choice. And then the subtitle is Looking for a Great U.S. Federal Job? And the answer is yes. And then my name is Dr. Phil Campos. So when you go to Amazon, just type in Dr. Phil Campos and my name comes up. And like I said, it's a great price, man. I mean, it really is. It's got a lot of information. It's a good read. And then again, you can share with folks. You're a mom and dad and you're trying to help your kids, work in the government, they're a friend. This is a good book to pass on to them because it's quick to read. And the other thing too, for you folks that want to work as contract specialists, and of course, you may have friends and all that, the pay, the benefits, they're really good. I mean, compared to the civil industry, and it's also, a great long-term career. So that's why I decided to write the book and put it out there. Like I said, my motivation was to help folks get into the government. And I have a video on YouTube right now talks about the interview process, and I'm going to do some more besides this one to help you understand being a contract specialist. Okay, so here's a review. I'm not gonna speak forever. I'm gonna hit the highlights to give you a flavor of what the book's about. But I think that the book will benefit you and anyone else you want to help. And I've had a lot of like parents contact me, and or people wanted to come go into the government. They just send me an email or they text me, and I help them. And I've had several folks call me and say, "Hey, I got the job. Thanks a lot for the help." No problem. Okay, so in chapter one of the book, And by the way, I just put it up. I'll put a better picture in a minute. But this is a book. Pretty thin, not not too bad. Okay, and this is my first proof. The first proof that I had to look at. Uh, so in chapter one, I talk about the history of being a procurement, not necessarily being a contracting officer, but procurement itself. And procurement is just another word for buying. So when the U.S. was first formed, the government formed, they didn't produce anything, and they still don't. Historically, the U.S. government doesn't produce anything. So, but they have missions that they have to perform, especially now, hundreds of missions. And back then, it was the mission of protecting the forts, etc. So the army would buy goods and services from the local folks and also from overseas, and to defend the United States or the colonies back then, and that's what grew, and it grew and it grew. So as the America evolved, all these other agencies were created, but each agency has a mission, and they need goods and services to run their agency. So the folks that buy for the government, they're called contract specialists, but not just anybody can buy. In order to buy, you have to have what's called a warrant nowadays, and I'll talk about that a little bit, down the road. Uh, the government right now buys billions of dollars in goods and services. Just think about it. The Department of Defense, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. I mean, they spend billions and billions of dollars on tanks and planes, etc. Department of Homeland Security has like 23, 24 agencies. They have to buy for them. The people on the border, the immigrations, the Secret Service. I mean, it just goes on. They need, and every agency has their own contract specialist. And I'll talk about this a little bit in the book too. But they all have one governing regulation. It's called the Federal Acquisition Regulation that everybody has to follow. Now, the Department of Defense and some of the agencies, they have their own regulation. Like the Department of Defense is called DFAS or DFARS, but they can't override the Federal Acquisition Regulation because it's a supremacy clause, right? I mean, they can supplement it, but the VA, the same thing. They have the bar, but they can't override the FAR. But they can use theirs to implement the FAR. But it's all basically the same because as you're going to find out, later on when I talk about contracts, etc. In what the government buys, it's just basics. An offer and acceptance of terms. That's what a contract is. So they're all basically the same. Uh, so all the agencies buy, and again, so from a historical point of view, the American government doesn't produce anything, so they have to buy their goods and services. Now, the other thing too is there's been an evolution in procurement, so have the laws. The laws, they're constantly changing and being amended because the buyers can only buy what Congress allows. So the law is that the agencies can only buy goods and services that they ask for and budget, and then Congress approved that money for those particular goods and services. And that's the only way they can use it. If they use it for anything else, they violate the law. It's an appropriations violation. So they have to use it for only the intended purposes. Okay. Right now, also historically, there's a lot of folks that are retiring. So people, it's called the grain of America. So trying to work for the government as a contracting officer or any field, but this is specifically for the contract specialist, the video, same approach for everybody else. But when folks are retiring, there's a void left there. And there's not a lot of younger folks coming in after the baby boomers and the millenniums, they could come in, but folks after the baby boomers and millenniums, etc., that's a good opportunity for y'all to get in. But of course, also, if you're a baby boomer, you can still get in. I mean, anybody can get in at any age. That's one thing I like about the government. They don't put an age restriction on people coming in. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history that you're going to read in chapter one. Again, it's not intended to be a thesis on the government history or on buying for the government. It's just I want you all to have a kind of a big picture. The one thing that I always found out that people they get paralyzed, paralysis by overanalysis. So I wanted to make sure that I don't over give you information on this book. I want it to be, short to the point, but get a big picture, and then maybe this will lead you to do more research and actually apply for jobs. Okay. In chapter Chapter two, I talked about becoming a contracting officer, and so basically what I'm telling you to do is you go to the website and you apply through USA Jobs. You put your resume in, and that's how you start applying. But the one thing that, and I really can't tell you, like in this video because it's short, but all the steps that are involved. But do I have to have a degree? A 4-year degree. What are the requirements? Can I use my own past experience? And I'll give you a short answer. The answer is you don't have to have a degree. You have to have 24 hours in business. You don't have to have a whole degree. But as you move up in the chain of promotions, you will need a degree. Okay, that's like in the chapter 13. But the pay is good, and I have a pay scale. Uh, it's changed, yes, but I'll tell you what website to go look for, and then you can see the current changes. And normally, it's about like 1.8, 1.2%, increase. The military normally gets more pay raises than the non, military, but it's been growing, and right now it's pretty good. And again, along that, so when you go to the pay table and you see the pay, you want to add about 22% to that, because that's what they call a hidden paycheck on the civilian side. That's medical, dental, health benefits. Like it's like a 401k, but they call it TSP, the retirement program. That's when you put your own money in and they match it up to 5%. I'm telling you, it's great. So that chapter I talk about becoming a contracting officer. In chapter three, I talk about the steps of buying. What does it take for a contracting officer to buy? Okay, and of course, it's highly regulated. But the first thing is when agencies talk about their mission and what they need, they know how much they need their budget, and then they create a purchase request, much like they do on the civilian side, right? And that purchase request then goes to the buyers, the contracting officers. They look at it. They talk with the program folks. What do you want to buy? Make sure that what they want is in there, and then the contracting officer will look at it and see what type of contracts they can use or how they're going to buy, and then they basically put it out, solicit it, for the buy. Everything comes in, they negotiate what they're going to buy, and eventually leads to a contract. Okay, and then it's administered and closed, which is another couple of chapters I'll talk about in a minute. But those are the steps in buying. Again, it's not tough. I want to give you the big picture, and there's actually, when you work for the government as a contract specialist, they teach you all this. And it's like this, like what I'm telling you, it's like a week's worth. There's a lot of information. Simplified acquisitions, contract administration, small business. I mean, there's the negotiations are all, 1 week courses, but they're great because you go away for a week, from your work site, and you're with a bunch of other contract specialists, and you get to meet people, and you get to learn, and it's all paid for. Sometimes it's right there where you, in the area you live, or sometimes you got to go to another area, but everything's paid for, so it's pretty cool. But buying from the government is highly restricted, but they teach you everything you need to know. And before you can buy, then they normally let you work with someone else who's a buyer, like a contracting officer. They're teaching you, they're mentoring you. So before you go to learn yourself. I noted that buying has a lot of laws. Well, some of the laws governing procurement is the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is it's put on by the regulators, the government regulators, and they write the laws, and Congress approves it, and then that's what everybody uses. And the Federal Acquisition Institute, then they put it out, and they're always getting feedback. But the book, the FAR really is when you look at it, it's really the big picture. It's really about forming a contract, which is an offer to buy something, by the government, an acceptance by the contractor, and then they have all the terms and conditions. That's kind of basically a contract. The difference is that with the government, they have a lot of rules and regulations about buying, for the intended purposes, and small business, and not going over, and it's not like in the civilian sector. Civilian sector is a lot more lenient. They do have their rules. The civilian sector, they use a uniform commercial code, and in the military, they use the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and of course, I also said the DFARS and BARS, but the main one is the FAR. So there's a lot of laws, regulations, and statutes, that go with buying, and the reason is because these laws and statutes and regulations are formulated is to protect the taxpayer, because the contracting specialist, contracting officer, uh, is using the taxpayers' money when they buy goods and services. So Congress wants to make sure that it's being, used properly and expended properly. So we'll look at that in chapter 4. In chapter 5, we talked about the stakeholder. What's a stakeholder? Well, a stakeholder is who's involved in the process. So normally it's like the program people, and then the buyers, and maybe if the work gets out to contractors, they want to get some information. Maybe they might be involved. The people in budget, people in legal, because everybody wants to see the contract. And the big thing about the stakeholders involvement is to make sure that what the government is buying is actually what they need, that they have money, and that the contractors, when they're going to bid on it, they want to make sure that they're bidding on something that's accurate. So that's why everybody's involved. And of course, the bidders, the people that are going to buy, uh, they respond to whatever the government puts out there in a solicitation. Okay. Uh, so those are the stakeholders. In chapter 6, I talk about the SBA opportunities. You know, if I'm a small business, how do I get in? Well, first of all, whether you're a small business registered or not, it's always good to register as a small business. With the SBA, which is pretty easy process. You just go to the website and apply. So I talk about that, and then also for people that want to work in the SBA, they have to register what's called SAMS. It's a you know it's a system administration, and all business have to go into SAMS, and so they put their name and their phone number, and that all the requirements about that they have an accounting system, etc. So small businesses can log in there. Now the contracting officers by law have to try to give business to the small business folks if they're under the small business threshold. The lower dollar values like 150,000. They have to try to go there first. So small business folks, they try to get stimulated, because a large percentage of the U.S. businesses are small business. So the government is trying to help the small business so they can stimulate the economy. So I'll talk more about that in more detail. Chapter 7, I talk about, how do contractors find out about the solicitations? Well, in the book, what I tell you is you want to go into what's called Fed Biz Ops, Federal Business Opportunity. And so anybody, contractors go in there, open it up, and then type in, like, if you're in construction, if you're whatever goods and services you're selling, get some keywords, and then all the solicitations pop up. But here's the deal. You can do all that, but if you're not registered in SAMS, and this is what I tell folks in the book, then you're not going to get a job. So again, this is just about, what contract specialists learn and have to do. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. How do contractors find work, for the government? And it's billions. Ross Perot, Dell, that's how they all became billionaires. Work, selling to the government. You sell for the government a big contract. It's like, for as a contract specialist, you can be spending 100,000 or 10 million or 100 billion. That's part of the job, man. But as a contracting specialist, contract officer, but from a from a seller's, a contractor point of view, that's huge money, man. And it's for long term. And a lot of these long term contracts are like for 5 years, 15 years, 20 years, and they're talking about 100 million, 10 million, whatever the dollar value is. It's a long time. So contractors want to get government contracts. So I talk a little bit about that in the book. How they get that. And also, I talk in the book in chapter 8 about negotiated contracts. And so from a taxpayer's point of view, and I say this in the book also, so that you can learn, but there's different types of contracts. There's a spectrum. And a negotiated contract is a way for the government to get the best price for the goods and services for the taxpayer, so it's negotiated. And in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, that's in FAR Part 13. Now, you can go yourself now, anytime, just Google Federal Acquisition Regulation, and then go into FAR Part 13, and you can, you'll see what I'm talking about. It talks negotiation. But you can go to the FAR and look at all the different ways or all the regulations that we have to go through, and it's right there in black and white. It's no secret. Anybody can go in and look at that. So whether you're trying to work in the government or to get ready for an interview, or you're a contractor trying to get a job for the government, it tells you everything we have to live by as a contract officer. So there's no secret. It's pretty transparent. Okay, so I did hundreds of negotiated contracts under FAR Part 13, and there's other ways to buy also, like SBA and just different websites going to GSA, etc. And number nine, I talk about the different types of contracts. There's a spectrum. Some contracts are really good for the government. Those are the negotiated contracts because we keep the price, down. And then there's some contracts that are called cost reimbursement. So, we want to try to get a fixed negotiated contract as opposed to cost reimbursement, because over here it's fixed. It keeps the contract from ballooning up, and a cost reimbursement, the costs go up because you're paying the contractors back, as they're buying, so that can get out of hand. So the best one for the government is a negotiated fixed contract, and the best one for the contractor is a cost reimbursement. And so that's the range, and all these are negotiable. Normally, the government, tries to control the type of contract. It's negotiable. Anything's negotiable, negotiable for contracting officers, the contract, but that's normally the way it always goes. Uh, in Chapter 10, I talk about contract administration, which is a huge area in being a contracting officer. If when you get a job, uh, you solicit it, you do the contract, and then you got the whole period of to administer it. And during contract administration, what I talk about the book is that's when you're the steward of the contract. You want to make sure that what's in the statement of work is being followed, that the contractor is providing the goods and services that the government is paying for. Okay, so that's a pretty big area, and that's sometimes there. The contract may have to be modified. So you have a modification because something changed, something that was unforeseeable. But I talk about that a little bit about contract administration, and then so once all that's done, that I talk about in Chapter 11, close out. So once everything's done, then I discuss how to close out a contract. So as a contracting officer, when they're closing out, they have to make sure that the government is receiving all the goods and services that they asked for in the statement of work. So there's a process of a closing out, making sure that they got everything they inspected, whether it's construction, goods or services, everything has to be proper, and then the contract is closed out. There's a checklist, and it's in the FAR, the checklist that you have to look at. Did they get paid? Did we receive everything? And then did you have to verify that they got paid, and then all the invoices, all the checks and balances. Then it's closed out, and then they have to keep the contract for like 6 years. Now there's different timelines, so I'm just going to say 6 years for now. But depending on the type of contract, there's a time period that has to be archived. And nowadays, a lot of contracts are electronic, so you have to keep the electronic documentation, for that period of time. Right now, the majority of agencies, they still use paper. GSA, who I was working for, they're leading the paperless push for the president, and we started back with President Obama, and it's still being used now. But there's they're trying to cut back on paperwork. A lot of agencies are not there yet, so they still have paper and electronic. Okay, that was chapter 11. Chapter 12 is the last chapter in the book, and I talk about teleworking, uh, electronic signing, and the future of contracting. So let's talk about teleworking. Teleworking is great. I teleworked for a long time when I was in the government. Uh, and again, with GSA, the General Services Administration, they've been tasked to get information and lead, the push for teleworking. Teleworking means you work from home and with your computer, but it was great. Like when I worked for GSA, uh, I would work here in my office. This is my office, by the way, at home, and I'd have my laptop that they provided me, and within my laptop I had a phone, and in there, so I could just use that to call. I had a cell phone They gave me everything I needed. So it was great. I get up in the morning, I would just come log in into the laptop again. I'm using my own computer now, but it was the same process, with my laptop. But you're connected. So when I would log in, I actually was logging into the mainframe, the server at work, not here. So it's all, secure. But I would just work right here, in my home. This is my office, like I said. And if we need to talk, to other folks, I could just call them or just do a little viewfinder, and we could talk to each other on the viewfinder. So the government is very, very advanced. They provide you with everything you need. They're pretty secure, and so the work is really monitored. By electronic transaction when you log in, and the programs we use for procurement for buying, it's all electronic. So all the information you put in, whatever contract you're working for, your bosses can see what you're working on. There's no big secret, so they can see what you're working on and what your workload is. And my boss, most of the bosses, but my boss would hang with them, out of Fort Worth, Texas. They all go, on their work at home days, telework at home. They don't go to a coffee shop and work there. You don't have, because teleworking, you don't have to work from home. You can be anywhere as long as the work's being done. And they tell us that over and over again. We don't care where you're working, just get it done, right? So, I mean, you could be at Starbucks, you could be here, you could be at a bookstore. Now, I would work here from my house just because it's quieter, but I could work anywhere I want, as long as the work gets done, doesn't matter. But I'm the kind of person that I like to focus on my work, and just I don't like to be distracted when I'm working on my contracts. But if it's something that's not too tough, I may work at a bookstore, but for the most part, I'll do it right here. All right, so that's what I did when I was working for the government. Uh, and like I said, everything's electronic, so I would get all my purchase requests. When I would work with my project managers, it was all electronic. When I would sign the contract, when I would send letters, emails, everything was electronic. Everything's uh, you know, gets controlled, so it was pretty good. Now the future, and this is the last thing I talk about, in the book in chapter 12. The future of being a contract specialist is really about working at home. Being a contract specialist is a job that, as long as the United States is a sovereign, country, you're going to have a job. Why? Because government agencies do not buy themselves. I mean, they don't produce anything. They have to buy goods and service from the marketplace. That's why you need contracting officers, contract specialists. So if you get into this field, you'll have a job forever. And the other thing too, contracting officers, contract specialists, they're always in a critical need. So sometimes you hear people are getting rifted or getting fired or getting cut off. It's never the contracting officers, because we're critical. Like right now we're just reading. Right now when people when they offer them early buyouts, the government will offer the agencies, the person, $25,000, so they can retire. Well, they're moving that right now. There's a law. They're trying to pass a bill, a law in Congress and Senate, where they're going to offer people to retire early $40,000, to get them out. But again, that's great. But for contract specialists, they never did that because we were always in short demand. So what does that mean for you? That means that, as a contract officer, contract specialist, it's a pretty good deal, right? The long-term security. And that's why, for myself, I love working for the government, because I worked in the corporate world. I worked in law firms. I worked in, business. But there was always that insecurity, no matter how great you're doing on the outside, it's employment at will, and I would see hundreds and hundreds of people get laid off. I mean, it wasn't nothing personal, but when the sales go down, you got to get rid of people, and eventually they rotate upper management too, because, let's face it, upper management costs more. So that's business. That doesn't happen in the government. In the government, they try to control it through, attrition, etc. Like don't hire so many people back. But the problem is, is that, and the government realizes this, is that you can try to cut back people and use the civilian model, but the workload doesn't change. Okay, so what happens is, as you're cutting people, the workload just gets backed up. But here's the deal. In the government, when the work gets backed up, your supervisors don't get on you about that. They say, do your best, because we know at 5 o'clock you got to go home because we can't pay overtime. So that's when stuff gets backed up. So folks that really, really, really want to work hard, and there's a lot of great people in the government, man. They really want to get it done, but because there's no books and they can't violate the appropriations law and labor laws, mainly appropriations law, they make people go home at 5 o'clock. Say, yeah, we know we're behind, but we can't pay overtime. Not like in the civilian sector, right? So people have to go home and the work gets backed up. So that's kind of what's going on. Okay. Well, guess what? That's the review for the book. Again, I didn't go to it, in big depth because it's something you read yourself with more. Go into Amazon.com, search for Dr. Phil Campos, and get the book. Uh, Share it or ask other folks to buy it. Again, you say you may not want to, but buy for somebody else. Give a little gift. It's not even $20. I mean, it's a great gift, man. If you don't read it yourself, if you want to help someone working in the government or someone that's in college, etc., it's really good. And like I said, that was my motivation for writing this. Was is to help other folks, coming up to work in the government. Like I said, I love it, and I know you will too. Well, again, I'm trying to find. Oh, there's the out button. I hope you all enjoyed this video. This is Dr. Phil Campos coming to you from Dallas, Texas, and I hope you all have a great week.